Broke taxi driver saves a kidnapped Texas girl. Unexpectedly, she is a millionaire's daughter. The meter was running, but his luck had run out. For years, Jason had watched his life spiral into a dead end, a worn-out taxi, an empty bank account, and a mountain of debt that felt impossible to escape. Every night was the same. Cheap fares, rude passengers, and the sinking feeling that he was one bad day away from losing it all. But tonight was different. Because in his back seat sat a girl, no older than 12, shaking like a leaf, tears streaming down her face. Her tiny hands gripped the seatbelt like a lifeline. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Drive." And then, in the mirror, Jason saw them. A pair of headlights. Close. Too close. His gut tightened. Something was wrong. The girl wasn't just running. She was being chased. And Jason had no idea that this one decision, this one ride, would change everything. Jason Reynolds wasn't always like this. There was a time when life felt promising, when he had dreams, a future, a reason to wake up in the morning. But that was before the world chewed him up and spit him out, leaving him with nothing but an old taxi, an empty bank account, and a gnawing sense of failure that never let him sleep. Now, his reality was a never-ending cycle of exhaustion and disappointment. His days started and ended the same way, slumped over in the driver's seat, staring at the dashboard clock, watching the minutes tick away as he prayed for just one more fare. One more ride to keep his head above water. One more passenger before his gas tank hit. His apartment, if you could even call it that, was a tiny, crumbling box with peeling paint and flickering lights. The fridge? Mostly empty, except for a half carton of milk and some leftovers that were probably past their expiration date. The landlord had stopped being patient. The eviction notices on his door were no longer warnings, they were promises. Jason had no backup plan, no savings, no one to call. He had tried to make it work. Really, he had. He worked longer hours, picked up every ride he could, even skipped meals to stretch what little cash he had. But the bills never stopped. The debts piled higher. The world didn't care about a man who had fallen behind. And worst of all, he had stopped caring too. Miracles? Those were for other people. Hope? That was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was just another broke taxi driver, crawling through the streets of Texas, trying to make it through the night. Until tonight. Until the moment that girl stepped into his cab, eyes wide with terror, and changed everything. Jason was used to odd fares. The drunks who slurred their words and fumbled for their wallets. The couples arguing in the back seat, thinking he couldn't hear them. The late-night workers, exhausted and silent, lost in their own thoughts. But this one felt off. His phone buzzed with a new ride request. 2:47 a.m. The pickup location wasn't a house or a bar or even a hotel. It was an empty stretch of road on the outskirts of town, near an old industrial district. The kind of place people avoided after dark. Jason hesitated. Every instinct told him to reject it. He was dead tired. His gas tank was running low, and something about it just felt wrong. But he needed the money. With a heavy sigh, he accepted the ride, turned the wheel, and headed toward the pin on his screen. The streets were empty, silent except for the soft hum of his engine. The further he drove, the darker it got. Street lights became fewer, buildings turned to abandoned warehouses, and a creeping unease settled in his chest. Then, in the distance, he saw her. A girl, alone, standing on the side of the road. She was small, no older than 12 or 13. Her hair was tangled, her clothes wrinkled, and her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to disappear. Jason slowed the cab, his headlights washing over her fragile figure. She looked terrified. The back door swung open before he could say a word. The girl climbed in, slamming the door shut behind her. Her hands were shaking. Her breath was uneven, almost gasping. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, raw, desperate. "Drive." Jason frowned, glancing at her through the mirror. "You okay, kid?" Her eyes darted to the window, scanning the darkness. "Please, just drive." Something about the way she said it made Jason's stomach tighten. She wasn't just scared. She was running from something. He hesitated for half a second, just long enough to hear the distant roar of an approaching engine. Then, from the darkness behind them, a pair of headlights appeared. Too close. Too fast. Jason's grip tightened on the wheel. His pulse pounded in his ears. This was no ordinary ride. Something was very, very wrong. Jason had been driving taxis long enough to trust his instincts. Something wasn't right. He kept his hands steady on the wheel, but his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror just for a second. And that's when he saw them. A pair of headlights, glowing in the distance. His stomach clenched. Maybe it was nothing. Just another car on the road. It was late, but truckers and night shift workers passed through here all the time. Then, the headlights moved closer. Too fast. Jason's pulse quickened. He eased his foot onto the gas, pushing the cab a little faster. The headlights matched his speed. The girl in the backseat curled into herself, her breathing shallow. She was gripping the door handle so tightly her knuckles were white. Jason swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "Kid, who's back there?" The girl didn't answer right away. Her lip trembled, and for a moment, he thought she might break down completely. But then, in a voice so small he barely heard it, she whispered, "They took me." Jason's hands clenched around the wheel. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just scared. She was running from someone. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if saying it out loud made it more real. "I don't know how I got away. I just ran. But they're coming." Jason's heart pounded against his ribs. He looked back at the headlights. They were gaining on him. Whoever was in that car wasn't just driving. They were hunting. A sick feeling crawled up Jason's spine. This wasn't a drunk passenger. This wasn't some lost kid trying to get home. This was a girl who had escaped something terrible. And now, that something was coming for her. Jason's grip on the wheel tightened. If he stopped now, if he hesitated for even a second, they both might not make it out alive. Jason had been in bad situations before. Nearly broke. Days away from eviction. Running on empty in more ways than one. But this was different. This was life or death. The black SUV behind them was closing in, its headlights burning into his mirrors. The road was dark and empty. No traffic, no witnesses, nothing but miles of asphalt stretching into the night. Jason's grip on the wheel tightened. Then, the high beams flicked on. A blinding wall of white light filled his rearview mirror, forcing him to squint. It wasn't just about seeing him now, it was intimidation. Whoever was back there wanted him to feel their presence. Jason's heart pounded. The girl was curled up in the back seat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her breath shaky. She knew. She could feel it too. Then his phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. Jason's gut twisted. Every fiber of his being told him not to answer. But his fingers moved on their own, fumbling to pick up the call. A voice, low, cold, and eerily calm, slid through the speaker. "Pull over now, or you'll regret it." Jason swallowed hard. His throat was dry. Who was this? His voice came out rough, but he wasn't sure if it was anger or fear holding it together. The line went dead. No name. No explanation. Just a warning. The SUV swerved suddenly, inching closer to his bumper. Jason's pulse slammed against his ribs. This wasn't a bluff. They weren't just trying to scare him. They wanted him to stop. Jason looked in the mirror, at the girl, at the terror in her eyes. She had already run once. She had already survived whatever horror they had put her through. And now, it was his turn. Jason didn't have money. He didn't have power. But he had a choice. And right now, there was only one move left to make. His foot slammed down on the gas. Jason's heart slammed against his ribs as the speedometer climbed. The road ahead stretched into darkness, but there was no time to think, only to react. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Behind them, the SUV wasn't just following. It was hunting. The engine roared as it surged forward, closing the distance inch by inch. Jason swerved hard to the right. Tires screeched, rubber burning against asphalt. The taxi nearly fishtailed, but he fought for control, jerking it back on course. In the back seat, the girl gasped, her fingers digging into the seat. Then she screamed, raw, terrified. "They have guns." Jason's stomach twisted. His eyes flicked to the mirror, just in time to see the glint of something metal in the SUV's window. A gun. His pulse skyrocketed. This wasn't just about catching them. These people were ready to kill. Jason's mind raced. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have backup. He didn't even have a plan. All he had was the city streets and a car that had seen better days. Think. Up ahead, a narrow alley, barely wide enough for his taxi. It was risky. One wrong move, and they'd be trapped. But if they stayed on this road, they were dead. He had no choice. "Hold on," he shouted. The girl barely had time to brace before Jason yanked the wheel left, hard. The taxi swerved violently, cutting into the alleyway. The walls of old brick buildings loomed on either side, flashing past in a blur. The SUV tried to follow, but it was too big, too fast. Jason heard it before he saw it. A metallic screech tore through the night as the SUV's side scraped against the alley walls. Sparks flew. The driver fought for control. Jason floored the gas. If he could just make it to the other side. The alley opened up into an empty side street. He took the turn at full speed, tires nearly lifting off the pavement. For a split second, silence. Then a crash. A sickening, crunching sound as metal crumpled against brick. Jason stole a glance in the mirror. The SUV had slammed into the alley walls, stuck. For the first time since this nightmare started, Jason could breathe. They had a chance. But they weren't safe yet. He turned to the girl, his voice urgent. Where do we go? Because whoever was after her. They weren't giving up that easily. Jason's hands trembled on the wheel. His knuckles were sore from gripping it so hard, but he couldn't loosen his hold, not yet. Not until he knew they were safe. The alley emptied onto a quiet street, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there were no blinding headlights chasing them, no voices threatening them over the phone, no gun aimed at his back. Just the hum of the taxi's worn-out engine and the sound of her breath sharp, shaky, uneven. Then, in the distance, sirens. Jason's chest heaved. It was over. The girl let out a sob, one she had been holding in since she got in the car. She slumped against the seat, hugging her knees. Tears streaked her dirty cheeks. Jason stole a glance in the mirror. For the first time, he really looked at her. She was young, maybe 15, 16. Dressed in expensive clothes now torn and stained from whatever nightmare she had escaped. This wasn't just some runaway. Jason swallowed hard. His voice came out rough. Who were they? He asked, his hands still gripping the wheel. Why were they after you? The girl wiped her face with her sleeve, but it didn't stop the tears. She lifted her gaze, her lips trembling. Then, she whispered it. My dad. She choked out. He's a millionaire. I'm his daughter. Jason felt his stomach drop. Silence filled the cab. For a man who had spent his life scraping by, for a man who had to count every dollar just to eat. He had just risked his life for someone worth more than everything he had ever touched. His heart pounded as the weight of it sank in. This wasn't just a lost girl. She was a walking fortune. And he was the broke taxi driver who had just saved her life. Jason sat behind the wheel, gripping it so hard his fingers ached. The taxi's engine hummed softly beneath him, but he barely noticed. His mind was still racing, his pulse still pounding in his ears. The nightmare was over. Flashing red and blue lights painted the night, casting eerie shadows across the empty street. The girl, no, the millionaire's daughter, stood a few feet away, wrapped in a warm police blanket. Officers surrounded her, taking statements, nodding, exchanging looks of disbelief. A man rushed past the police line. He was older, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the middle of the chaos. His face was pale, his breath short, his eyes frantic, until they landed on her. Emily, the girl gasped, turned, and before Jason could even process it, she was in the man's arms, sobbing into his chest. Her father. His knees buckled, and he clutched her tight, stroking her hair, whispering something Jason couldn't hear. Relief, gratitude, overwhelming emotion. It was all there in his trembling hands, his tear-streaked face. Jason exhaled slowly. It was time to leave. He reached for the gear shift, his body aching from the tension of the night. This wasn't his world. He was just a broke taxi driver who got caught up in something far bigger than him. Tomorrow, his rent would still be due. His fridge would still be empty. His life wouldn't change. He saved a girl, but he couldn't save himself. But then, a voice. You. Jason froze. He turned slowly, and there, standing under the glow of the streetlights, was Emily's father. His eyes locked onto Jason's, filled with something heavy, something beyond gratitude. He took a step forward. Then another. Jason swallowed, unsure of what to say. The man's voice cracked. You saved my daughter's life? He took a shaky breath. I owe you everything. The words hung in the air. Jason blinked. His hands clenched into fists. For the first time in years. Hope. Jason's hands were rough, calloused from years of gripping a steering wheel, from long nights chasing fares that barely paid his rent. Now, they trembled as he stared at the envelope in his palm. He swallowed hard. The millionaire's gaze was steady, his expression unreadable. The weight of the night still hung in the air. The fear, the chase, the desperate flight through darkened streets. But now, the only sound was the distant chatter of police officers and the rustling of the envelope between Jason's fingers. He hesitated. Then, with a slow, shaky breath, he tore it open. A single piece of paper slipped out. Jason caught it before the wind could steal it away. His eyes flicked downward, and his world stopped. Zeros. Too many to count at first. His vision blurred, his breath hitched. He gripped the check tighter, his knuckles turning white. This couldn't be real. He looked up, his lips parting, struggling for words. The millionaire stepped closer, his voice firm but warm. No man who risks his life for my daughter should ever be broke again. Jason's heart pounded. A lifetime of struggle, of barely scraping by, of feeling invisible, erased in an instant. He came into this night with nothing. And now, everything had changed. One act of bravery. One moment of choice. A man who had nothing walked away with more than he ever dreamed. Life can change in an instant. But the question is, would you have done the same? If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and comment below. Let us know, what would you have done in his place? And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping, unpredictable stories that keep you on the edge of your seat.